Alrighty then, so this is going to be a quick review of streamlining your workflow with the Q500 Encoder, formerly Easy Encoder, which is a series of FFmpeg scripts. Now, a lot of people are frightened by the term scripts. They think there's lots of editing or secret tricky maneuvers that you'll need to conduct, but I've worked with this, creating this over the last couple of years to make it as simple as possible. And in a nutshell, it is a simple way to encode a final render. And what I mean by final render is once you've edited all of your footage in your video editor, it could be Sony Vegas, it could be After Effects, it could be Premiere, it could be any of the variety of Apple suites that encode video, special effects, or things of that nature. So what I'm talking about is your final encode, one that you're going to keep, that you're going to upload to social media, that doesn't need to be 5 gigs, 2 gigs, 8 gigs. You're only wanting to upload a 60, 80, 100, maybe a few hundred megs tops for a 5, 6, 7, 8 minute video, or even smaller in length and duration. And what I've got is the Q500 encoder, which includes a variety of scripts. The 4K processing converts any variety of AVI movie file, QuickTime movie files, or MP4s from a 4K to either 720p or 1080p, or simply you can process any 1080p footage or 720p footage with any one of these. It's a matter of selecting the type of file that you have to convert it to the type of file that you'd like to have. And for this example, I've got a 1 minute and 16 second length piece of footage captured off my quadcopter. No editing has been done to it, and I've got a new folder with a copy of that. You can see that it's 364 megs, and it's 1 minute and 16 seconds, and it's at 1920 by 1080, 60 frames per second. Now, let's say that I did not want to edit this at all. I'm happy with it. I'll just play a brief second of it here. And you see that it's straight off the camera, it's QuickTime, and it's a rather clunky file for a minute. It's 300 plus megs for a minute's worth of footage. No color correction done. This is just straight off the camera. Okay. Let's say that I don't want to do any editing. I just want to upload it just like it is to YouTube. Okay. I'm going to take one of my encoder scripts, and I want to upload this file, which is a movie file, a .mov. I want to convert it to an MP4 file. So I'm going to pick any one of these. I want to convert a movie file to a 1080p MP4. So I'm just going to copy that to here. Alright, that's all I need to do. I'm just going to double click it. It's going to process it for me, and it's working at converting this file to the new one at a rate of 30 frames per second. Now, it's not converting it to 30 frames per second. That's just the speed at which it's converting right now. And we're 9 seconds into it. And that's all you need to do. It's that simple. It's drag and drop. You'll drag the appropriate script in the folder with the video that you intend to convert, and you can see here this script is converting this file from a AVI file to a MP4 file in a 1080p format. Now, this original could have been a 4K video. It's not, but if it were, it would be converting that 4K video to an MP4 to a 1080p. It would leave all the frame rate the same. It was just downsize it, optimize it, and prepare it in an MP4 container for upload to YouTube. Now we're 28 seconds into the encode. Okay, we're encoding this particular portion of the footage at 27 frames per second. That's just the rate at which we're encoding. That's not the final frame per second. We're obviously encoding a 60 frames per second piece of footage, but currently encoding it at this rate per second. Now, if you had a faster computer, you'd obviously be encoding it at faster frames per second. And we're 43 seconds into it. I'm just going to let this go in real time just so that you can see. And we're looking at about 48 megs right now, and we're about 48 seconds or so into it. 4950 megs. So you can get an idea, and we're going to play these side by side. We're going to play the original straight off the quadcopter, and then we're going to play the converted one that we plan on uploading to YouTube. Now, once I've completed this, I'm going to take it into Sony Vegas. That's what I use, being Windows. I'll use Adobe After Effects sometimes to do special effects or things of that nature, but generally for just butting footage up back and forth and putting in fades and adding sound, I'll use Sony Vegas. And we're 1 minute and 5 seconds into this encode. You can see a list of the bit rate for the current quantity of frames that we're encoding, and it's variable. It's giving us a constant quality encode here, so that if there's a need for less bit rate, it's not going to increase your bandwidth and consume it all by overloading your bandwidth. So it's completed. It took a minute and a half or so to do that. Our original is at 364 megs, 1 minute 16 seconds. The one we've just converted is 62 megs, 1 minute 16 seconds. So let's play our original. It's loading up here. We'll play for a few seconds, just so you can get a visual comparison. Alright, we'll close this down, and then I'm going to open up the converted one. And there's your visual comparison there. There's no difference except for the dramatic reduction in file size, and that's what you want. You want to retain that original quality after all the time you spend out there and all the risk you put your quadcopter through, and then you'll spend all the time editing, putting your clips together, getting everything with music and synchronized just the way you like it. And then why at the very end would you want to reduce your quality and have a poor render or poor encode after all of your hard work? You want to keep that right up to the very point of upload. So I'm going to minimize this. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'm going to delete this. That's just where I'm just working with a copy of that. I'm going to bring up Sony Vegas, and I'm going to take this copy here. Get this guy out of the way. I'm going to drag that into my timeline. Alright, so I drug that into my timeline, and I'm going to conduct a little bit of grading to this. I'm just going to bump up the contrast and think of that, some basic editing here. I'm going to add a filter. I'm going to add a brightness and contrast, and with that, let me pull it over here, jump to my other monitor. I'm going to take that contrast up just a bit, about there. And I'm going to add another filter. I'm going to add the secondary color correction, and I'm going to bump up the saturation just a little bit. Something about like that. It's going to be good for now. Let's scrub through it and see what we've got. See, we've improved that color there by increasing the saturation and bumping up the contrast. Okay, so I'm just, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to render this back out. I'm going to render it as, when you're rendering, it's important to render, unless you have an intention of reducing the bit rate or the file or the dimensions of the footage, to render it out in the frame rate that it was shot at the dimensions that it was shot. Okay, I've got some presets that I've made here, and you can use QuickTime or a Huffy. QuickTime, if you pick the animation flavor of that, will give you a lossless render. It's going to be a huge file size. Same with the Huffy. For this example, I'm going to go ahead and use a QuickTime, but I'm going to customize it. You can see here my template is set for 2997 frames per second. That's not the proper frames per second for what I've shot in. It needs to be at the 5994 or 60 frames per second. Audio. I did not have audio in this clip, so I'm going to turn that off. Okay, so let's just look at what we've got. We're going to render it at 1920 by 1080. That's correct. Proper frame rate. The rest of this can be left at the default. We want it to be the animation preset, and that's going to give you virtually millions of colors. You won't have any degradation of color depth, and that's what we want to keep. So I'm going to answer OK. I'm going to tell it to my desktop, to that new folder. We'll just call this QuickTime. And remember, this will be the one that we'll see here shortly after we render it. So it's rendering that now. It's beginning at the first frame and marching its way through. It's going to take a few minutes to do this, but let's keep this honest. We're going to render it from the beginning to the end, and so you can see the final results here. Now, I guess I can elaborate a little bit while we're talking. In Vegas here, we could have put a variety of different footage clips in here. We could have shrunk them, overlapped them, applied transitional effects and things of that nature to get our edit the way we like it. You can put a soundtrack in here, different sound effects. You might have whooshing wind. I did one where you could hear children playing in the background. It's just something to give it a little bit of life. To listen to loud rock and roll music sometimes not appropriate for the scene. The rotor sound is kind of annoying after the first minute or so. Sometimes to edit these clips, 3 or 4 seconds is usually enough of a scene. And if you've got enough variety of footage, you don't want to really be too repetitive. You don't want to show 45 seconds of the same scene and then another 45 seconds of the same scene from a different angle. It's to really get a good shot. Sometimes you'll only use a piece of the shot, and so that's what's important, to really plan your shot. Not so much just fly around and look with your camera, as you'll see so many people do these days. They'll take a camera and they just walk around and just as if they're looking through it, and they're not really paying attention to what they're filming. They're not giving any consideration to subject matter. They're just kind of blindly wandering about filming. And so to kind of plan your shot and then maybe get a little bit more in length and maybe start a little bit earlier, and then be selective about the pieces that you get and try not to be too repetitive. And another irritating thing, it seems that people, especially with cell phones, they like to film in this vertical mode, which is really odd. None of the display outputs, or most of the display outputs aren't intended for that type of renditioning of the footage. You've got so much real estate available, and then you only use a small vertical piece. Primarily that was intended originally for like point-of-place marketing, where you may see a vertical type LED display device, but not so much. I just don't think people are aware, or in fact a lot of the times people just really don't care. They have no concept of quality, and they're just running wild, shooting wild, and it's unfortunate. But this is rendering. This was part of a clip where I'd gathered many and only used just a brief 2 or 3 seconds out of it for my final composition. But that's where it's important, is to get more of a scene than you actually plan on using. And it's not necessarily that you show, for example, the takeoff of your quadcopter sitting in the grass for 15 seconds. That may be nice to review your entire flight, but if you're putting together a production, you'll see that in a lot of videos where the quadcopter is sitting buried up to the camera in the grass, and then it takes off. And these things get boring real quick. When you're new to it, it's kind of exciting to see, but if you're trying to put together some type of production, you might want to consider editing that stuff out or not including it in any of your final renders. So just my advice, just my opinion, but sometimes less is more. And if you can keep your individual scenes down to maybe under 5 seconds, unless it's really something compelling, like a glacial melt or a big ravine, or ease in on a waterfall or something of that nature. But just pay attention to what you're shooting. Now this is coming to be complete here in any moment, and then we're going to bring that in and process it with the Q500 encoder. You'll see that this QuickTime file, this Apple QuickTime file in an animation format, is going to be really big. It's going to be a huge file. It's not something we want to try to upload to YouTube. Now, the quality is going to be there, but if you've got a high-speed internet connection, and I mean a real high one that's going to accommodate you uploading 2 or 3 gigs, maybe even more, then that's fine. But most people don't have that luxury. So you want to be able to keep as much quality and color depth without washing out the color of the footage That is a common problem with QuickTime movie files. They've got this known issue that goes way back. If you're in just like an H.264 encode, not necessarily the animation codec, but it's called the gamma bug, where you end up washing out your colors. Your blacks are gray and your whites are dark, and it just provides for a real muddied down, low quality render. And Apple never fixed that, but there are some workarounds using different color profiles. Unfortunately, you can't do it from within the at the time that the product or the footage was captured. You have to do it. You have to do it in post with a different color profile. So, just about finished here. But again, I wanted to keep this honest. It's going to be probably a little lengthier than I'd like for it to be, or for you'd like it to be. But just so that you can see this in its completion, in its entirety. We're going to let this thing run in its real-time scenario here. And a lot of people say, well, they don't need this. Well, I'll tell you what, you'll never get the quality encode with any other application other than that Q500 encoder. I've made sure to include the proper profiles in there so that you get the full color profile, the full color depth profile at the final render. Others leave that out, and you end up with a lower bit depth render, which ends up making your footage look washed out, dirty, muddy, and generally blurry in a lot of cases. You'll even get some glitchy movement in your footage. Okay, so that's rendered out, and we've got our original. Okay, and then our QuickTime, which you can see is 15 gigs. Now, that's horrible. That is too big of a file, but the benefit is we've retained all of our color information, and that's what we want. Anytime we move between editing applications, we want to keep that as lossless as possible. So let me play this, and you'll see that to render 15 gigs worth of data is going to be very slow and jerky. Okay, so we can move through that. Now let's compare that to our original with no color correction, again, straight off the camera. You see that it's rather flat. The colors are rather flat compared to the one that we enhanced a little bit. We bumped up the contrast and the saturation. See that right there? Greener greens, darker darks. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this file and we're going to convert it with the Q500 encoder in preparation for upload to the web. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to isolate it from this one by creating a new folder. Okay, and I'm going to move that here. Then I'm going to go back into my encoders, and I'm going to take that one that converted a movie file to MP4. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it in here, and I'm going to run it. We're going to let this guy run, and now we're going to be converting that 15.6 gig file to something a lot more manageable without losing any quality. And here again we're at encoding this particular scenario at 26 frames per second. Now some of this has to do with this encoder is reading 15 gigs worth of data, so there's going to be some headroom loss in that. And we're encoding at 25 frames per second, and we're 13 seconds into the encode, and you can see the bit rate based on the particular area that we're in the file. Some areas of the file have more color and more movement, and to retain a constant quality require a higher bit rate. And you'll see here that this bit rate, to retain a constant quality throughout the duration of the footage, it's adjusting that bit rate again so that we don't waste bandwidth, data storage capacity in our file on areas that don't require it. We're going to apply more bandwidth, more bit rate to areas that have more movement, more color, more difficulty, just more data required in general. We're going to dedicate that bandwidth, that bit rate, to those areas of the file. areas that are static that remain unchanged. For example, it's just a static film where nothing's moving. Maybe a person walks through the scene, is going to require a lot lower bit rate than something where the camera's panning and moving quickly, where there's lots of color, lots of trees, lots of detail. So we're 44 seconds into this, encoding at a frames per second of 24. That's just the rate, again, at which we're encoding this footage, not the final bit rate, which will be 60 frames per second, or the final frames per second of 60 frames per second. So we're almost a minute into it, and we're about 59 megs. Okay, remember that other one that we'd encoded? We're about 60 megs now. 62 megs. So we're looking at about a meg a second, give or take. There's a further way to increase this, is you can do what's called a two-pass encode, where it analyzes it the first pass. You can speed up or slow down the analyzing, and the slower you go, the more time it takes, and the better quality it can get you at a much lower bit rate. It then again further analyzes it and uses that data in a more appropriate fashion than a faster analysis of the footage. Alright, so we've made a conversion. We've went from 15.6 gigs to 68 megs. Minute 16 seconds, minute 16 seconds. And if we play the one that we just converted, you'll see that there's not any loss of quality. All our colors there, we've got good movement. And if we look at our media info on this, we can see that we have a color range that is a full color range. I'll encourage any of you to examine the footage that you have coming out of any of your encoders right now, to examine that color range, and you'll see that it will always state that it's a limited color range. The Q500 encoder will always give you the full color range. So if we take and go back to this original, alright, let's look at that original, and we'll compare it to our encode that we just made. There's our original straight off the camera, and here's the one we converted. And you'll see that there's a difference. Of course, we applied our saturation and our contrast, where this one's flat, and then our converted one, where it has more color depth and a little more vibrance. So I'd encourage you to at least investigate it, and I hope this helped explain a few things to people that maybe are new to video editing. Alright, talk to you later. Bye-bye.